In the quiet, picturesque town of Pine Hill, an unimaginable crime was about to seize every resident in its chilling grip. Jennifer Johnson, a beloved wife and trusted friend, was discovered dead in her own home. A sanctuary turned sinister, her house, meant to protect, became the scene of a tragedy that would haunt the town. As news of Jennifer's murder spread, fear and suspicion quickly followed, stirring old resentments and laying bare secrets that had long simmered beneath Pine Hill's calm exterior. Whispers turned to rumors, each one feeding a dark narrative of betrayal, obsession, and hidden desires. At the core of this grim tale were two couples, each harboring secrets beneath the polished veneer of their lives. Daniel Garner, a respected architect with a charming reputation, was married to Linda, a kind and steady schoolteacher cherished by all. Mark Johnson, a successful financial advisor, was married to Jennifer, a woman whose spirit and warmth drew people in, making her absence even more haunting. To those around them, these couples seemed to have it all. They shared intimate dinners, spent weekends together, and grew closer with each gathering, their friendships appearing unbreakable. But one evening, at a lively dinner, a single suggestion changed everything. A fleeting look between Daniel and Mark sparked the idea of an arrangement, an enticing notion meant to bring excitement into their lives. Despite the risks, the thrill was irresistible, and soon they found themselves drawn into a path they could never have predicted. Boundaries blurred, bonds shifted, and what began as a playful experiment quietly became something else entirely. The arrangement started innocently, with shared dates and casual flirtations that stirred a thrill none of them anticipated. Jennifer and Linda laughed over the novelty of it all, both seeing it as an escape from routine, unaware of the darkness it would soon reveal. But for Daniel, this was no mere game. It was a rare chance to be closer to Jennifer, to keep her within reach in a way he'd never imagined. Beneath his calm, collected exterior, Daniel's fascination with Jennifer grew, hidden in plain sight. Only Linda began to notice the lingering glances, the distracted silences, a new tension building that felt just beyond her understanding. With each passing week, Daniel's fixation intensified. He found himself watching Jennifer's every move, her laughter, her expressions, as if each detail held some hidden meaning only he could see. For the others, this might have looked like a harmless thrill, a way to spice things up. But for Daniel, every moment with Jennifer brought him closer to a dangerous edge that only he recognized. Meanwhile, Linda's instincts whispered that something was wrong. She noticed Daniel's subtle but persistent distractions, the growing distance between them, the way his gaze followed Jennifer a beat too long. What had started as a playful arrangement had shifted into something else, a darkness cast by Daniel's hidden obsession, one that none of them could yet comprehend. And as they edged deeper into this dangerous game, they found themselves on a path from which none could turn back, with consequences they would never see coming. As weeks passed, Daniel's feelings for Jennifer took a darker turn, spiraling from harmless attraction into an all-consuming obsession. Every encounter with her felt charged, her laughter echoing in his mind long after they parted. Even at work, his focus drifted from blueprints to the memory of her smile, unable to escape the vision of Jennifer's bright eyes or the graceful way her hair framed her face. Her image wound itself tighter around him, each detail pulling him deeper into something he could no longer control. One afternoon, while driving home from a meeting, Daniel's thoughts circled obsessively around Jennifer, each memory of her sparking a hunger that grew sharper. At home, Linda tried to draw him into conversation, but his answers were distant, his eyes flicking toward his phone as if he were waiting. She noticed the shift, the distracted smile that crept onto his face each time Jennifer's name lit up his screen. But one evening, when Linda caught the thrill in his eyes, a chill ran through her. She saw something in his expression she could not ignore. Linda's instincts warned her. Something was deeply wrong. Later, as they sat on the couch beneath the warm glow of a lamp, she brought up her unease, her questions laced with growing suspicion. She could sense a darkness in him, though she couldn't yet name it. Daniel only smiled, waving away her concerns and telling her it was all in fun. She reminded herself of their agreement, brushing off her fears as jealousy, yet a gnawing sense of dread told her that her suspicions were no mistake. Meanwhile, Jennifer began to notice a shift in Daniel. What once felt like lighthearted fun now carried an uncomfortable weight, shadowed by the unsettling intensity in his gaze. The thrill of their arrangement had faded, replaced by a creeping unease. Daniel's presence felt different. His glances lingered too long, as though he saw her not as a friend, but as something to be claimed. During a casual gathering at her home, Daniel's attention grew even more invasive, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When the evening ended and the guests left, Jennifer confided in Mark, her face lined with worry. What once brought excitement now felt threatening, and she knew it was time to end things. Mark agreed, and together they decided to break it off, both oblivious to the depths of Daniel's growing obsession. The next day, Jennifer decided to call Daniel, her unease urging her to finally put some distance between them. When he answered, his voice was eager, almost unsettling in its intensity, but as she explained her desire to end the arrangement, his response sent an icy wave through her. Surprise turned to disappointment, then to something more desperate as he asked, almost pleading, why she wanted to end it. To him, this connection was real, something worth fighting for. Jennifer tried to soothe him, explaining it had only been the thrill of the arrangement, but her words only deepened the tension in his voice. Even beneath her calm words, Jennifer sensed the growing danger. This was only the beginning. In his mind, the real game had just begun. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's obsession tightened around him like a vice, pushing him past any sense of control. The playful exchanges between him and Jennifer had dissolved, replaced by a heavy silence that clouded his every thought. He felt her slipping away, and the thought of losing her spurred him into a dark desperation. Refusing to let her escape, he began tracking her every move, lingering just beyond her line of sight. Each morning, Daniel waited in his car across from Jennifer's workplace, hiding in plain sight as he memorized her movements. The way her hair bounced, the rhythm of her steps, it became a twisted ritual, a strange satisfaction from being near her, if only from afar. But soon he wasn't invisible anymore. One afternoon, Jennifer caught sight of him through her office window, his unblinking gaze fixed intently on her. Her stomach turned. This wasn't some innocent coincidence. Shaken, she confided in Mark, her voice edged with dread as she described Daniel's disturbing presence. Mark masked his worry, trying to calm her, but Jennifer's story replayed in his mind, an unsettling suspicion creeping in with each detail she shared. He could sense it. This wasn't just her imagination. Something was very wrong. While Jennifer struggled with Daniel's unsettling behavior, Linda found herself haunted by her own suspicions. Daniel had become distant, his expression cold and unreadable, his presence almost hollow. One evening, she watched him, noticing the rigid way he gripped his phone, his jaw clenched. Her frustration surged, and she finally confronted him, her voice tense with a mixture of anger and fear. But Daniel dismissed her questions with chilling ease, his words carefully controlled. She felt a strange, uneasy calm from him, a kind of patience that felt wrong. A flicker in his eyes, a dark irritation, warned her to hold back. Linda sensed she was standing before a side of Daniel she didn't know, something buried just beneath his practiced calm, something she couldn't bring herself to uncover. In a desperate attempt to relieve the tension, the couples arranged a weekend getaway at a secluded lodge outside Pine Hill. The plan was simple: reconnect, unwind, and try to return to the friendships they once shared. But from the start, it was clear that Daniel's fixation had only intensified. His words, his gestures, even his silences were all directed toward Jennifer, each one drawing her closer despite her efforts to distance herself. Around the fire, Daniel leaned closer to Jennifer, his tone dark and low, his words laced with a sinister charm. He spoke of leaving their marriages behind, painting a twisted vision of a world where only the two of them existed. Jennifer's heart pounded. His suggestion left her shaken. She responded with a calm, firm rejection, reminding him of her commitment to Mark, setting a line she hoped he would respect. But beneath Daniel's forced smile, a darkness burned. Her words cut deep, leaving him seething. She could feel it, a hidden intensity boiling just beneath the surface, an unspoken tension thickening the air between them. She knew without a doubt that this wasn't over. After they returned home, Jennifer resolved to sever every tie with Daniel. She blocked his number, avoided places he might appear, and poured her fears into quiet conversations with her closest friend, Sarah. One afternoon, as they sat over coffee, her voice trembled with the weight of her confession. Daniel's actions left her feeling trapped, as though his shadow stretched into every corner of her life. Sarah urged her to confide in Mark, sensing the danger that lingered in Jennifer's voice. But Jennifer hesitated, afraid of what her confession might unravel. What would it mean for her marriage, her friendships? Despite the threat, she clung to the hope that cutting contact would keep her safe. Yet the more Jennifer withdrew, the darker Daniel's thoughts grew, his obsession twisting further. He no longer saw a boundary, only an obstacle he was determined to overcome. Despite every effort Jennifer made to put space between herself and Daniel, his fixation grew darker and more desperate. The further she pulled away, the harder he clung, driven by an uncontrollable need to keep her close. That evening, as Jennifer settled into the silence of her home, a soft knock echoed from the door, jolting her senses. Her heart raced as she peered through the peephole. It was Daniel. A wave of dread crashed over her, freezing her in place as she struggled to decide what to do. Her instincts urged her to lock the door, but the haunted, unhinged look in his eyes held her gaze for a heartbeat too long. When she tried to shut him out, his voice took on a sharp edge, his words blending, pleading with a quiet but menacing urgency. She felt a chill run through her. A dark promise lingered in his tone. Later, even after the door was closed, the eerie feeling didn't fade. She turned on the television, hoping its noise would fill the unsettling quiet of her home, but the sense of something lurking in the shadows remained. Each creak of the floorboards, each shifting shadow seemed louder, darker. Then a faint sound came from the kitchen, breaking the silence. Heart pounding, she called out, her voice tight with fear, but silence was her only answer. Stepping cautiously, she moved toward the kitchen, her breath shallow as dread tightened around her. And then she saw him, Daniel, standing there, his face a mask of barely contained rage. His eyes held a wild intensity, a look she'd never seen before, and she realized there was no reasoning left in him. The terror flooding her veins drove her to flee, but Daniel lunged, crossing the distance between them in an instant. What followed was a chaotic struggle, a frenzied fight for freedom as his obsession finally turned violent. The line between friendship and destruction shattered in that moment, and in one horrifying act, Daniel's actions took Jennifer's life, leaving no trace of what once was. As dawn bathed Pine Hill in light, the town remained blissfully unaware of the horror inside the Johnson home. Sunlight crept through the windows, casting an eerie calm over the scene. Standing amid the ruin of his actions, Daniel was frozen, his mind struggling to process the weight of what he'd done. Panic gripped him, and he moved in frantic bursts, desperately trying to erase every sign of his crime. His hands shook as he discarded objects and scanned the room, thoughts spinning wildly as he tried to control the uncontrollable. But the truth was inescapable. Every step he took seemed to unravel the flimsy plan forming in his mind. He could never explain this to Linda, never make it seem like anything other than what it was. Yet in his panic, he clung to a delusion, convincing himself he could pass it off as an accident, a moment of chaos that had spiraled. But as he finally stepped away, reality pressed down, and the fragile illusion he clung to began to crack. Evidence remained, waiting to be uncovered by those who would soon see through the mask he desperately tried to wear. The ordinary hum of Linda Garner's evening shattered when Daniel's panicked voice crackled through the phone. His words poured out, fast and desperate, every one of them laced with dread. Jennifer is dead. The revelation hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her momentarily breathless. She barely recognized the frantic man on the other end of the line, but the horror of his confession was unmistakable. Daniel was pleading, his voice tinged with fear, begging her to help him cover up what he had done. For a moment, Linda froze, her mind unable to process what she was hearing. How could she possibly be part of something like this? Yet the pull of loyalty was strong, stronger than the instinct to run. She was bound to him by years of marriage, trust, and love. With a shaky breath, she agreed, her words coming out as a quiet promise, sealing her fate in a way she could never undo. Every detail they discussed felt like stepping deeper into a trap, each plan wrapping around her like invisible chains. She felt a chill settle over her, knowing that she was no longer just an innocent bystander. She was a part of this darkness now, and in her heart, she sensed this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt her forever. In the days following Jennifer's murder, the town of Pine Hill was thick with whispers and unease. Detective David Mitchell was assigned to the case, his reputation for seeing through deception preceding him. As he began his investigation, Mitchell's instincts quickly flagged subtle inconsistencies in Linda and Daniel's statements. Linda's calmness seemed forced, her voice carrying a slight tremor that hinted at something hidden just beneath the surface. Her eyes darted, betraying the tension she tried to mask. Daniel, on the other hand, was visibly nervous, but Mitchell found his responses too polished, like he'd prepared his story in advance. Each word seemed carefully chosen, but not quite convincing. As Mitchell dug deeper, his questions became more pointed, each one chipping away at Linda and Daniel's composure. Linda could feel the pressure mounting, her nerves fraying as she struggled to keep their story straight. Daniel's confidence, once steadfast, began to falter, and Mitchell sensed it, picking up on every telltale sign of fear and guilt. With every question, Linda's heart raced, a silent fear building within her that they couldn't escape Mitchell's scrutiny forever. The detective was closing in, and she knew that one small misstep could unravel everything. The truth felt like a ticking bomb, one she and Daniel were desperately trying to keep from exploding. Weeks after Jennifer Johnson's tragic murder, the quiet streets of Pine Hill still pulsed with unease, the community haunted by the unanswered questions surrounding her death. Just when the investigation seemed to reach a dead end, a shaken neighbor walked into the police station, his face pale as he recounted a troubling memory. He'd seen Daniel's car parked outside the Johnsons' home on that fateful night. This revelation jolted the investigation back to life, and Detective Mitchell immediately mobilized his team. They meticulously reviewed the neighbor's statement, combed through surveillance footage, and re-interviewed witnesses, their sense of urgency renewed. One piece of evidence led to another. Surveillance footage confirmed Daniel's car lingering near the Johnson residence, and a close examination of Jennifer's phone revealed an unsettling series of texts from Daniel, each message more desperate than the last. His words clung with a possessive, almost suffocating intensity, escalating with every unanswered reply. The pattern was clear, a downward spiral of obsession that had taken a dark turn. As Mitchell analyzed the evidence, the cracks in Daniel's carefully woven story became undeniable. The facade Daniel had so desperately maintained was now crumbling, and it was only a matter of time before the truth would tear it apart completely, leaving him with nowhere to hide. Armed with undeniable evidence, Mitchell brought Daniel in for questioning one last time. The room was suffocatingly tense, the dim light casting long shadows that seemed to swallow the man who had once been so composed. Mitchell presented each damning detail with calm precision. The car footage, the relentless texts, the witness statements. Daniel's mask of confidence slipped with every piece of evidence laid before him, his face paling as Mitchell's words pinned him down, leaving no room to escape. Finally, the pressure became too much. Daniel's resolve shattered, his voice breaking as he confessed. His words spilled out in a mix of remorse and desperation, painting a twisted picture of that night. He described the confrontation with Jennifer, how he'd sought a connection, a last chance at validation, only to be met with rejection. In that moment, his emotions had surged, overwhelming any trace of reason. What he once called love had become something dark and violent, leaving a trail he could no longer outrun. But Daniel's confession didn't end with himself. He dragged Linda into his story, implicating her, binding her to his crimes in a final act of desperation. Mitchell wasted no time bringing Linda in for questioning. At first, she denied everything, her voice tight with fear, her words stumbling in a frantic attempt to maintain control. But as Mitchell presented the evidence, each fact building like the weight of an avalanche, Linda's defenses began to crack. Daniel's accusations hung heavy in the room, his betrayal cutting through her final remnants of resolve. Under the unyielding pressure, Linda's denials faltered, her gaze lowering as she admitted her role in the cover-up. Her loyalty to Daniel, her fear of losing everything, each had led her down a path she could never have imagined. Now, as the reality of her choices settled in, she was trapped, bound to a crime that would haunt her forever. With every revelation, the walls closed in on both Daniel and Linda. There would be no escape, no way to reverse the choices that had brought them to this dark place. The consequences they had tried so desperately to avoid now surrounded them, inescapable and final. The trial of Daniel and Linda Garner captivated the nation. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, cameras flashed, and people lined up to catch even a glimpse of the story that had rocked their small town. Inside, under the watchful eyes of the judge, jury, and the public, Daniel and Linda faced the truth of their actions. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of Daniel's obsession, tracing his descent from admiration to violence in the brutal killing of Jennifer Johnson. Witnesses described the unsettling changes they saw in him, each testimony tightening the trap around him. Every word from the stand brought another layer to the dark story that had started as an innocent friendship. Daniel sat motionless, his eyes avoiding everyone's gaze, while Linda's face paled with each new revelation, her quiet regret obvious to all. As each piece of evidence was revealed, the weight of their actions became impossible to ignore. The courtroom was tense, filled with the horror of how things had spiraled so tragically out of control. Each witness and every detail added to the tangled web of obsession and betrayal, showing a side of Daniel and Linda that few had seen before. For Mark Johnson, the trial was only a painful reminder of what he had lost. Sitting in the courtroom, he seemed like a shadow of himself, his face lined with grief. Every detail of the case, every mention of Jennifer's last days, was a fresh wound. As the trial concluded and he walked through the crowd outside, the sense of emptiness only deepened. Justice was served, but nothing could fill the void left by Jennifer's absence. Memories of their life together, their laughter and dreams, now felt like distant echoes, a painful reminder of what could never be again. When the court gathered for sentencing, a heavy silence fell over the room. Daniel received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He showed no reaction, his face blank as the weight of his punishment settled in. Linda, who had cooperated with the authorities, was given a reduced sentence of 15 years, with a chance for parole after 10. But as the final gavel struck, the gravity of her choices became clear. Her loyalty to Daniel had cost her everything: her freedom, her future, and her peace. Pine Hill would never be the same. In its quiet corners, people whispered, the sense of safety in their small community forever shaken. Detective Mitchell, who had followed the case to the end, felt a lingering unease, a reminder of the darkness that can hide within even the closest relationships. For those involved, the pain would not fade easily. Mark, left to rebuild his life, found comfort in memories, but the emptiness was impossible to ignore. And as the town tried to return to normal, the tragedy served as a permanent reminder of what can happen when love turns to obsession and trust gives way to betrayal. If you like this crime story and want to see more, please give a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Hope to see you at the next one.